here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to paint a rainbow rose in our sketchbooks for Sketchbook Sunday, or at least that's what I did, and you can kind of watch the process how it unfolded. This took about 45 minutes to do, all in all, and I started off by just using clear water and a soft round brush to sketch the petals of a rose very loosely, and then I just dropped in some lemon yellow just on its own, and then some cherry red on its own, and let the colors mingle. I wanted to make sure that I didn't end up with mud for my rainbow rose, and using some really kind of fresh primary colors helps that. And now I'm using some cerulean blue, which is actually phthalo blue, but they call it cerulean in the Mission Gold line for some reason. And I stuck with cool versions of my primaries. So I have a red, yellow, and blue, but I have a cool yellow, a cool red, and a cool blue. I find that when I stick with cool colors, they are far less likely to get muddy. I mixed up some purple with my red and blue and added that in, and I mixed up some green and also added that in where the blue and yellow touched. Roses can get a little confusing because there's so many petals that are packed in closely together, so I did go in with a little bit of pigment on my brush and try to sketch out a few individual petals, and you're gonna see that throughout this process the flower is going to evolve. I will lose and find petals as I go, and I'm just trying not to let it turn into a big blob. So and truth be told, this is my second attempt on this. I did try doing one where I sketched it with pencil first, but I ended up with more petals than were there, and it was just a mess. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try to capture the essence of a rainbow rose with just water and paint, and I really enjoyed that process so much more. Now to do the leaves, this is a technique that I really like. It's actually kind of like a decorative arts technique, but I'm using a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm using the flat of the brush to kind of make these tapered triangles, and I find that I get a really natural looking leaf that way, and it's just a lot of fun. So just play with your flat brushes and see if you can get nicer petal or leaf shapes with that. Everybody develops their own style and their own brushes they prefer to use. I typically like rounds mostly for watercolor. However, sometimes I want to grab those angles or flats because they offer some unique characteristics. I also wanted to mention that this is not watercolor paper per se that I'm working on. This is a Fabriano Venice book. It's a sketchbook, but I do like it for watercolor. I will link it up below. It's what I do all my Sketchbook Sunday sketches in. It feels just like it's a crispy, lovely paper. I believe it's wood pulp because I think it would say if it was cotton, but it just is really fun to experiment with inks and watercolors on. That said, you're not going to get as much flow when you do wet into wet as you would on a traditional watercolor because it's going to dry out unevenly, but I think part of that is what I like because it gives me a spontaneous effect. Also, the paper is going to dry a little quicker than it would if I was using like a cotton watercolor paper. I switch back and forth between brushes on these leaves because I don't want to have them all look the same. So I'm using a number 6 liner, which is a long bristled round brush, and just kind of squiggling in some edges and some lines. And that's just going to help me make the leaves a little more lively and not make them look like they were all painted the same way. I like things to just kind of look like they almost happened effortlessly on the paper, and swapping your brushes out, doing wet into wet, those different techniques will help you achieve that look. I found the process of painting my flower this way very intuitive. Like previously when I tried sketching it with a pencil and then going in to paint it, I found it to be a little fussy. This just feels very intuitive, spontaneous, and fun. At this point, I'm layering some shadows and details, so I'm using red to do some of the little kind of veins in from the edge of that big petal there, and I also used it to separate some of the petals in the center. I'm being kind of conservative with my colors here, like I'm using just red, and then, okay, when that didn't cut it, that didn't show me enough shadow, I went in my mixed purple and put that in the shadows to make them stand out, and I just kind of work myself around the color wheel, basically, because that's kind of how a rainbow rose is. If you've ever seen those dyed flowers, they kind of go around almost like a color wheel, rather than every single petal being a different color. Often you kind of see them grouped together like color wheel, if that makes sense. And so that's what I kind of wanted to do here. I recommend drying between layers so that you don't end up with mud. That way I can go back in with this dark purple and I can add a lot of my darker shadows even in areas that aren't necessarily purple. Because that's my darkest shade that I've been working with, that gives me a nice colorful, non-muddy shadow color. If I was to use black watercolor paint, I think it would look really ashy and muddy. So I kept working through the picture with that same purple, darkening up veins on my leaves and adding in shadows where I feel like I needed a little bit more depth and contrast. The brush again I'm using is a number 6 liner, so it's like a number 6 round that just has long bristles. And the brand of brushes I'm using are actually the Menta brushes by Royal and Langnickel. They're brand new. I just spotted them at AC Moore the other day and I couldn't resist picking up a few to dry. I felt like I needed a little more definition, so I grabbed my Jane Davenport Incredible pen, which is just a fountain pen that I happen to really like. Not too expensive and it's very reliable, and it has some fountain proof safe black India ink in it, which is waterproof. And so I'm just adding a few little detail lines with that, and now I'm going back in with some paint. I thought my flower looked kind of funny without a stem. Then I thought, it looks kind of funny with a stem, maybe I should have left it off. But in the end, I'm actually glad I put that in there because it kept the rose from just hovering in the middle of space and time. At this point, I felt like if I did any more watercolor to this piece, then I would end up in the mud. So I decided that I was going to add some colored pencils to it. Now you can leave it just the way it is. I almost did, but Sketchbook Sunday for me is all about growing and experimenting and trying different things. So I thought that I would see if colored pencil would improve the sketch. If it didn't, hey, that's fine. If it does, wonderful. Because I don't feel like anything you do in your sketchbook is a waste. If it doesn't work out by trying new techniques, well, you've just learned something. So that's kind of how I approach the Sketchbook Sunday videos and practice. So I'm just going in with white first of all, and I am adding highlights. If I see something that definitely needs to be redefined, I grab my pen and just kind of outline it. But basically what I'm trying to do is give my picture here a little bit more of a solid form. It can get kind of loosey-goosey when you're going in with just water and paint and not sketching. You're kind of going without a plan, and sometimes you need to refine. Now I also really love to have vibrant glowing color, so I'm layering over that white that I put in there with the colors or the highlight colors of each of those petals. So on the orange and yellow petals I'm going to have kind of like a bright yellow highlight. On some of the leaves I'm going to have a bright yellow highlight. So I'm just kind of going around and trying to intensify some of those colors. Now for the base colors and the shadow on the yellow petals, I am doing this kind of poppy red, and I'm also using that on some of the red petals. So I'm trying to kind of cross-pollinate my colors between the petals of the flower so they all feel like they all go together as part of one flower, even though the petals are different colors because they've been kind of dyed that rainbow in that rainbow fashion. So it was a real challenge to me because it's one thing to do a flower that's all one color, like it's a peach rose, or maybe it's a red and white rose, but it's, all the petals essentially have the same colors to them. This is a challenge, and it was so fun to kind of wrap my head around it and figure out how the colors were going to go. I link up a reference photo of a rainbow rose in the video description. Now I didn't go by that for the sketch or the composition, but I did look at that to kind of get an idea for colors. Now I did change mine quite a bit, but it will at least give you a starting point if you want to do this, so you have something to look at versus just looking at my picture, which is stylized. If you can look at an actual photo of a flower, I think it would help you a little bit more if you're doing this at home in your sketchbook. So again, I'm using cues from my watercolor to do the highlights and shading. I used a like a black grape, which is this dark purple colored pencil, to do some of the shadows. I love using neon colored pencils for punching up highlights, and I'm not sure if Prismacolor makes the neon colors anymore, but the set that I had has the neons in there. But I know Royal and Langnickel has a neon set, and I think Tombow has a neon set, so you can definitely find neon colored pencils if you want to add them to your stash. I really think they add a luminosity, and because it's in a sketchbook, I'm not worried about them fading. Neon colors are known for their tendency to fade, but working in a sketchbook, again, you've got that freedom. Your book is going to be closed most of the time, so fading really isn't that big of an issue. That's why you can use your cheap stuff in there, and not worry about light fast too much. Now I'm using some ultramarine blue pencil, and I am adding some shadows and accent lines on my leaves, and also in between some of the petals, especially the blue ones, because I felt like their color needed just to be intensified a little bit. And so I would do kind of the blue and purple area, and I could even sneak it over into the green a little bit just to kind of give those petals some shadow and break them apart from one another. Since rose petals tend to curl out from the center, when I do add veins on the outside of the petals, I do try to curve them a little bit, curve those lines so I get that contour of a curled petal so they don't feel too stiff. Because if you overwork an area, it definitely can feel kind of flat and stiff when you're working in colored pencils, I find. This just helps keep it a little bit fresher. Now I've got a neon green pencil here, and I find with the neon colors, they're so transparent that you can go over any related color and really pump up the intensity, make it feel very vibrant, and without losing the color bias that you have underneath. So it's a great way to kind of blend a couple colors together. Like if you have some red and some orange petals, if you went over them with a neon pink or a neon red, that color would work good on both of them, or neon orange even. So you know, it's such a transparent color that you can really kind of layer over it to blend several shades together. I'm kind of working up on my final layers now, using some yellow and brightening up the leaves and the yellow petals, and just basically looking for any place I want to intensify the color. This project was so much fun. I had my doubts at the beginning, but I'm really glad at how it came together, and I hope you try something like this too. If you feel like you want a little more help in the drawing department, my class Learn to Draw with Lindsay is on special through the end of the month, so you've got about a week or just under a week to save 50%. I'll put the link and coupon code in the video description for you. I would love to see what you are making in your sketchbooks, so if you want to tag me on Instagram, I'm at Lindsay Weirich, and I would love to see your work. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting!